Today we go from a box of plastic components to a new viaduct for the Southern Main Line. Hi everyone, I'm Martin and welcome back to Donnington Castle Model Railway. Now today we're going to be working on what will eventually become the river scene. So that's on the front and left hand side of the layout, and I'll show you what that looks like at the moment. Now the plan here is to have the Southern Main Line, which is at the kind of the left or the back there, run over a viaduct across the river. And really before I can start working on any of the rest of that scene, there are kind of two key pieces that need to be in place. The first is the bridge that goes underneath the main lines on the Heritage Line, and that's now done and in place. And the other one is then the viaduct. Because these are the kind of the pieces that the landscape are going to kind of work and kind of flow around, and therefore getting them finished is really important to be able to do stuff. It's quite an important part of the layout because if I can get this scene moving forwards, that means I can get the final bit of the fascia done. I can get kind of effectively having a kind of a scenic run all the way along the front of the layout, which I think will be really nice. So I'm going to get stuck into that today. The viaduct is going to be, or is, I should say, a Peco or Wills kit. There are lots of videos on YouTube of people building this, so I'm not going to do a step-by-step guide on how to do it. What I will do is I'll focus on the painting because I'm going to try a few new techniques, and I'm going to be doing some airbrushing, but also then kind of talking about any kind of problems and challenges that I have along the way, because often those are the things that are most interesting and informative as kind of things to learn from. Right, let's get stuck into this kit. I'm just going to show you a very kind of brief summary of me building this. If you'd like a step-by-step guide, then Charlie from Chadwick Model Railway did an excellent guide on putting this together. In terms of painting, I'm going to kind of paint as I go along, so I'll kind of keep you up to date with what I'm doing on that. And that I'm going to use a kind of mixture of some of the techniques that Charlie used, but also that I saw on Horsehay Railway Modeler. So kind of between those two, hopefully I'll be able to get a good finish. I will add a couple more piers to this. I've got one more already, and I'll possibly add another one. One-handed, just try and get the box off. Yeah, a bunch of plastic components and some instructions. So in general, I'm going to stick anything together that's going to get painted the same. But stuff like the brick that obviously is kind of different to the stone, I'll paint that separately and then kind of assemble those bits. So it'll be a little bit of kind of see how we go with it. So first job for me is I'm going to get these bent into shape just so they're easier to fit in. Then I'm going to start assembling some of the stone sections that will kind of get painted together. And I'm going to use some plastic weld to do that, which is right here if I can reach over. So some of this stuff, Deluxe Plastic Magic. So hopefully that'll be a good thing to get things glued together with. So I'll get cracking and I'll come back when there are a few bits together that I can then start thinking about painting. So I've decided I'm going to paint these bits separately like this. So I've got 4 of these and 3 of these to do. I'm leaving the brick out because that means I don't need to mask anything up. And I'm just going to start by going over everything with a coat of primer. Now, I know a lot of people use kind of spray can primer. I'm not a big fan of that just because it feels like it's a kind of a lot of waste using those cans. So I'm going to use the airbrush on this. So I've got that all here and ready to go. I will show you a time lapse probably of doing a couple of the bits just so you kind of get an idea about the process. It's really, really easy when you're doing this kind of thing. I'm going to use, and the camera might wobble when I grab it, some of this stuff. It's Vallejo Surface Primer Grey. I found it to be pretty good on plastic. Priming with an airbrush, it can be a little bit of a faff. Because you kind of find your whole time is kind of cleaning the airbrush. As I say, when it'd be a lot easier just to use a rattle can. But because I've got such a lot to do, I will kind of just go with this. I find that this stuff doesn't need any thinning down. It's already actually thin enough, but I'll give that a good shake. And then, as I say, I'll do a bit of a time lapse of spraying a couple of pieces just so you can see. I'm going to be wearing a mask and there's going to be a lot of noise going on, so I won't be able to commentate. This is a cheap spray booth, one of the cheap ones from Amazon. There's a light and a fan, which you'll hear if I just switch on. So that's what I'm going to be using, but I'll turn it off because that makes a lot of noise. And then that's ventilating out of the window, but even with that, I'll still wear a full mask. Okay, right, I will get cracking with this, and you can see the process of just priming these surfaces. While I mention it, because I'm not going to show you this whole process, I'm then going to go over everything with, this is a Revell acrylic. I've never tried these before, so we'll see how well it works in the airbrush. This is sand. I'm going to use that on base coat. And then I'll kind of come back probably when I get to that point, and then kind of talk through what I'm going to do next. I was planning on doing this sequence to music, but it turned out that a few things went wrong. So the first thing is that I use a little sieve on top of the airbrush, and this is really there to kind of catch bits of kind of dry paint and stuff so they don't go into the airbrush. But when I put the primer in there, I noticed that it was thicker than usual. So I added some thinners into there. And I don't know if this is by design, but when you hit the right consistency for the paint, it then just drops through that little sieve, whereas it will just sit on top if it's too thick. So that was the first thing I did. The next thing was when I started using the airbrush, and it might not come across in the video, but I wasn't getting a good flow through it. I think this is linked to some problems I've been having with it previously. So I did what you're not supposed to do in these occasions, and I just whacked the pressure up on it. If I'd been doing, or if I've been doing weathering or something like that, working on a loco, there's no way I'd have done that. But because this was just primer, I rather than empty the airbrush out and kind of try and clean through it all. Sometimes this is a way of just kind of blasting through the problem, particularly as in this case, all the components had been soaked in cleaner. So I knew that there was just something kind of that just needed working through. But other than that, it all kind of worked, as you'll see in a second. It's now a few hours later and our primer has dried. It's a warm day, and anyway, it was a really thin layer. I mean, you can probably just about see the colour of the plastic coming through there. But we should have enough paint on there to kind of key the next layer. When Charlie did his, he used the grey of the primer as his kind of base colour. I'm going to do what David did and go with a kind of a sandier brown colour, and then kind of build up more of those kind of tones, so that we end up with more of a browny kind of stone, which I think will contrast nicely to the kind of the greyer stone that we have on the tunnel portals, which are kind of down the other end of the layout. So that's what I'm going to aim for as an effect. So as I said, I've got some Revell acrylic sand, so I'm going to get that in the airbrush. And this time we're going to go for quite a good covering, because we want this to be a nice consistent base layer. Although, having said that, a few little variations here and there aren't the end of the world, given that there's a few more layers to go on top. Given that we didn't get to do a musical time lapse before because of all the kind of things I had to point out, I will do a kind of a time lapse of just painting this. So hopefully you'll get to see how the airbrushing working when everything's kind of working well. So here again, you can see me adding the paint into the little sieve, and then using some thinners just to work that through. I turn the pressure back down to what it should be, because it's well, with the primer, I think that cleared whatever the problem was, and then this paint just came through really, really nicely. So as you can see, I just went over everything and gave everything a nice even coating. Okay, these have dried nicely now. This looks very yellow on camera. It's much more kind of sandy colour. I was a little bit worried when I opened that Revell paint, because it was the colour of Dijon mustard and about the same consistency. So I thought it was going to really not work in the airbrush. But it thinned down really nicely with those Vallejo thinners. And Vallejo paints are still my favourite, but that Revell aqua colour acrylic is probably my second. It went on really, really nicely. when you're doing this kind of thing, the key thing's to get nice, thin, even layers. So if you need to, well, if you have a big job, then do a very thin layer on each object, and then by the time you get back round to the first object again, that first thin layer will have dried, most probably, so you can then kind of go again. And just kind of keep working around like that. Don't be tempted to kind of keep covering and covering in paint. And if you do put it on too thick, you'll most likely get the paint running, and then you'll get a really poor finish. My next job is going to be to pick out individual bricks on these. And I'm going to use some Vallejo black brown. I'm going to put this on a palette with some white and some dark earth. And then I'm just kind of mix those in, kind of get a good variety of colours out of that, and just kind of paint them on. For the kind of the more decorative stones, for example, at the top of here and over the arches, I'm going to go with a lighter colour and a more consistent colour across those, as if they've been kind of specifically chosen. So I'm just going to crack on and do that. And what I'll do is I'll come back when I've covered everything with those colours, and you'll be able to see what that looks like. And this is where we've got up to, as you might be able to see, all the kind of the stone coping and stuff I've picked out in one colour. And then the rest, I've kind of picked out individual stones. It's a couple of greys, and there's kind of a couple of browns, and there's kind of a browny black as well. Now, I have to confess that it's this point in the project where I'm starting to wonder what this thing is actually going to turn out like. Because if we wanted a bridge that's perfectly adapted to camouflage itself in the desert, then I think we're on the right track. Bridge the layout, not quite so sure at the moment. But the next job is going to be to airbrush over this with Revel Dark Earth. So that's number 82. This is the aqua color range again. So that color is on some of the bricks at the moment, but the idea is that as I go over that with the airbrush, it will start to blend the colors together a little bit, and we'll start to kind of bring everything hopefully into a little bit of the right kind of place. After that will be then some washes, and then if we kind of stick with it, hopefully we'll end up with something that looks fairly realistic. So that's going to be my next job. This is going to be the last step I do before I put the brickwork in and start to assemble it. As you can see, I've not got the brickwork in here yet, because this is the last bit where I can potentially spray over that brick. So yeah, after that, then everything else should be fine. Again, after I've done the next sprays and I've started to assemble, I can put the coping on the top here and kind of get everything looking a bit more like a viaduct. But I will get the airbrush fired up and I will give that a very light pass and show you what that looks like when it's done. So it's coming up a bit yellow in this light, but hopefully you can see how that coat has just blended those colours together ever so slightly, so they're not kind of quite as distinct. So that will all come together more when the washes are applied. But now I'm going to assemble everything. These are our brick sheets for underneath the arches. So these have had a coat of Revel dark red on them. Now, one issue is, I don't know if you can see the glue mark down the back there. When I was kind of bending them to try and kind of get them to form to the shape that they're going to be, I don't know if this was particularly weak, but it kind of snapped right the way down the middle there. Luckily, it was fairly clean snap, so I used some plastic weld again just to kind of fit that, stick that back together. It feels quite strong, but I'm not going to risk that fully. What I'm going to do is I've got some 1mm card that's just as kind of flexy as the plastic. I don't know if you can see that one-handed. So I'm just going to stick that on the back of each one, and then hopefully that will give a bit of extra strength. So if there are any kind of weak points in the plastic, then hopefully that card being glued right on the back there will kind of help stop it kind of cracking again. I've left room around the edge where the plastic has to slot into the bridge arches and at the ends. But hopefully that will kind of be a good solution. I'm going to do it on all of them, just in case there are any other issues. But I'll chuck some super glue on that. I'm going to use probably medium so it doesn't soak into the paper too much before it sticks to the plastic. And then we'll see how we get on. Should have mentioned is that you do need to bend the plastic when you stick the card down. Otherwise, because the card will need to kind of has got a kind of longer path because it's on the outside. But this didn't work anyway because as soon as I tried to add any flex back into that, the plastic snapped. So I'm going to have to try and find a way of dealing with that when I fit it back. This one is one. This is one of the unbroken ones, and you can see that I bent it as the glue was drying. So that's kind of got a good solid shape. I'm going to hold off on the other two for now because ultimately this one was the whole reason for doing it, and that's a big fail. So I will just see what happens when it comes to slotting that into the viaduct. Okay, so where are we up to? Well, all the pillars are still separate, but I've put the main bit of the viaduct together. The middle section, the join's not too bad. On these two, it's not great, so I might have to deal with that. But the real disaster is underneath. Now, you thought it was bad, the fact that one of the sheets of brick had broken. Now, that's the best I could kind of get it, which, to be honest, I think we could kind of get away with. But one of the dangers of buying secondhand is you don't know how long the kits, particularly kits, is how long they've been sat around for. And this type of plastic is notorious for going brittle as it gets old. So you might think, well, that was obvious because that's split down there. But the brittleness didn't stop there. It actually fractured all over here as I was putting this together, which was an absolute nightmare. So got a bit of a decision to make. This one I could have left, I think. Oh, by the way, it's quite interesting how the kind of the misting from the super glue actually looks like quite a nice weathered effect. Anyway, coming back to these, I'm going to have a go at making some repairs that look like the bridge itself has been repaired. So if you do look on really old viaducts, you will kind of see patches of what either concrete or mortar that's kind of almost been rubbed over a big area where it looks like there's been kind of quite a major repair happening at some point in the past. So that's what I'm going to go for here. Now, I have on the shelf some milliput, which I've never used before. So this stuff. So I'm going to have a go at using that. I'm going to start out by repairing this bit because I think that will be fine. And then I'm going to have a go at this. And we'll just kind of see what it ends up like. So a bit of an experiment. Milliput says it's white, so when that comes out white, I'm then going to look to paint that kind of a dirty, mortar-y kind of colour. So maybe the colour that's used in between the bricks anyway. So let's give that a go. Once that's done, then we can kind of think about putting the whole thing together. Well, one thing to note is I haven't put any of these kind of support pieces on the ends. I think I'm going to have to because otherwise that kind of brick kind of hangs in there. So I will have a go at that. This is the fragile one, so we'll see how that turns out. It may well end up that this shatters even more. So yeah, all good fun. Right, I'll come back when we've made some progress. Well, hopefully some progress. So just before I get on and finish painting this, I just wanted to show it in situ. A couple of obvious things to note. One is that the track level of the back there is going to have to come up. That shouldn't be a problem. We've got quite a bit of a run on that side to bring the gradient, just as a gradient up to get it up to that level. And then that bridge is going to sit back where that track bed is at the moment. So we're going to have to redraw the river slightly. I think it'd be nice to have one of the pillars in the middle of the river and then the other two pillars on the banks either side. But yeah, we'll worry about that once we've got it in place. But it's all glued together now. The repair, I don't know if you can just about see under there. Probably can't, but that still needs painting and it needs weathering. And I'll come back when that bit's done. This next step is what Richard from New Junction would probably call messy modelling. So I'm down on the floor, big plastic sheet. I have some Vallejo German black brown mixed with some acrylic thinners to make a bit of a wash. And then I'm just going to go over this entire thing with quite a big brush, soft brush, and I'm just going to let that run down. Just coat it all completely, no real kind of technique to it, and just kind of see then what it looks like. And hopefully at the end of it, we'll have something that's starting to look a little bit more like a proper viaduct. But let's get that on and see what happens. And here we are after our first wash. So making progress, I think, but still a long way to go. So next wash is going to be a dark grey, and we'll see what that looks like. And then possibly a black wash after that, but we'll see how we get on. Okay, I think we are starting to get somewhere now. This might look quite dark on camera, but in reality you can see that sand colour coming through, but now we've got this kind of grey tint to all the bricks as well. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the black brown again, but I'm going to add a bit more black, and I'm going to water it right down. And then I'm just literally going to go all over that and get kind of plenty of kind of streaks running down it. And I think then that kind of then we're going to have that kind of nice palette of that kind of sandy color underneath with some kind of gray and black and brown. And I think that's going to look really cool. So I'll come back when I've done that and see how we're looking. It's now time to put our finished viaduct into the landscape. You can probably see there some wooden blocks. These are actually just offcuts from the laser cutter that just happen to be the right size. That's just going to be where the feet of the viaduct are going to be before it's all kind of bedded in and I kind of take it in and off the layout. They just kind of give me an indication where it's going to go. You can probably see that I've been in and I've altered the kind of the run-up, which is the Southern Mainline. That's now coming up at about a 2% gradient on the corner, up to about a 3% gradient on the slope, on the kind of lead up to the viaduct itself. Now, I was thinking about whether I kind of chop the bottom of the viaduct off in order to kind of make that slope a little bit less. I think that I'll lose some of the kind of the presence and of how the viaduct looks. And particularly when that's put into the landscape with the river, because obviously when those river banks are up, they're going to kind of come up part way up the pillars as well. So yeah, I'm going to keep the viaduct as it is. As you can see, I've kind of raised that up slightly. So next step is going to be just to get that in place, and then I think we're done for this time. Now, you're not going to see this because it's going to be the end span. And there's no real viewing angles on the layout. That means you're going to be able to see this. It looks really terrible, actually, in this light with it kind of reflecting off. But I'm actually quite pleased how the repair jobs come out on this. Let's say it doesn't look as good on camera as it does in kind of real life. But considering how horrible that looked at one point, I think that's not too bad a job. So let me just pop the viaduct in. I'm not going to try and put it over those blocks one-handed. But you can see I've kind of been over this now with a few weathering powders. There's a big bit of kind of sand and mud there. I've used some white enamel wash just to give that kind of effect of kind of some of the minerals leaking out of the stones. And just kind of wash those down and then tone them down a little bit. And then there's kind of bits of fine turf that I put on and a few bits of underbrush just to kind of give the hint of some kind of plants and things starting to grow on there. I'm sure I'll keep tinkering with this ever so slightly until the point where it's kind of fixed in place. But on the whole, I'm really happy with how that's turned out. I don't know how well the colours are coming through on the camera. That's the only thing. I have put some extra light on it, which you might now be able to see, which is now making that look a little bit overexposed. But in person, you can kind of really still see the kind of the hints of that kind of yellow sand colour coming through. But lots of kind of variation across all of that stonework. and then all the weathering effects. And I'm really pleased with how that's turned out. As I said, I'll do a bit of tinkering, no doubt. But yeah, I'm really happy with that. I think the real danger now is that will make me want to really get stuck into building the rest of the scene when I'm supposed to be still track laying. I guess my excuse for that will be is that I'll be able to pop some cork on top of here and then get the Southern Main lines run all the way around this side now. So that's probably my kind of excuse for kind of working on this part of the layout. But yeah, like with that in place, once that's back in place, and with this kind of bridge, I think they're the kind of the two main fixed points that lets me kind of build up the landscape around it, and yeah, that should look really good. And there's a final shot of it in its final place, and I'm really happy. And there we have the viaduct in place in that scene. Still a lot of work to do around it, making sure that we get the kind of the track laid and then that river scene developed. But those will be things for another day. I have to admit that there were bits of this I really enjoyed, like the painting, particularly that kind of idea of kind of painting things kind of really garish color, and then somehow at the end they end up looking like what you wanted them to look like. I think that was really enjoyable. But I really hated was kind of putting those brick liners into that viaduct and everything else associated with that. That was just my worst nightmare, and I really didn't enjoy that. But it's built, it's looking okay. We can still do some work to it, and that's another bit of the layout that's starting to take shape now. So I'm kind of really pleased about that. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed seeing the process, the ups and the few downs along the way. Now, if you are not a subscriber, then there'll be a button coming up in a second. If you please would consider subscribing, that means you'll get notifications for all of the kind of the latest releases from the channel, and you'll be able to see me keeping work on the layout and kind of moving forwards. But I will see you all on another video soon. Bye-bye.